Manny Saxena, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you, Will. Good to be here.
Manny, we are going to hear about the wonderful world of street sweeping today. And I say that without sarcasm. Street sweeping business is the type that many in the Acquiring Minds audience will love to learn about. It is a boring business, quote unquote. It's recurring, it's enduring, it's essential, and in your case, it was life-changing. So let's get into it, Manny. Can you start us off with some background on you, please?
Sure. For those of you who can see me, it won't come as a surprise that I was born and brought up in India. And my dad was an army officer back in the day, and we traveled a lot. I changed schools 12 times growing up, which was really the building blocks of my personality going forward. But then went and did engineering like most Indians did back in the day without really thinking about what I wanted to do long term. And realized pretty early on that I was going to be an average engineer. My mind worked more at the system level versus product level. I was more interested in business. So really started to gravitate towards just business topics and figured I needed to learn more, dig deep. And where else to come but the mecca of business for my business school education, the US. Came here in 2012, went to Kellogg Northwestern, and really, for the first time, kind of felt that I was, at least on the professional front, doing the right thing with it and what I wanted to do with it. And really got lucky while I was at Kellogg. I wanted to escape the Chicago winters. So decided to do a study abroad session in IESE Barcelona, where I got, I didn't know, I got into this class called Search Funds. And this was probably the only class outside of HBS and Stanford back in the day, which taught about search funds. And it was taught by none other than Peter Kelly from Stanford, and really fell in love with the concept there. And I just thought it was fascinating. I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I figured this was another way to go about entrepreneurship, which for me catalyzed everything I loved about entrepreneurship, right? And but also had a realization that I was not prepared to do it right after business school, because I was an engineer before this. I'd never lived in the U.S. period to try and pitch it to a U.S. citizen to sell his business to me without the business background, without any background in the U.S. Felt hard at that point. So thought I'd give it some time and get some more. I got the business education, but more kind of practical business education. So ended up looking for general management roles out of Kellogg. And the one that seemed the best fit for me to prepare myself for entrepreneurship or search fund in the future was the turnaround team at Sears, which was a fascinating place for somebody like me to go in, because I was more of a internal consultant at Sears, jumping from one function to the other. And I wanted business education. I got baptized by fire, really, and learned a ton there, and really got my confidence there in terms of that, hey, I could contribute to this society, and then I could stand on my own two legs and really be a force of change. And I started to feel comfortable. And then, as I was thinking about search funds after spending about 3 years at Sears, I randomly got an offer from one of our vendors at Sears, the Series C hot startup, AI startup based out of New York. And they said, Manny, would you come do sales for us? And I was like, I'd never done sales. And I had a very different idea of who salespeople were in the US. And I was like, are you sure you didn't want me for another role? And he was like, no, you've been a user of the product. This is a really, consultative sales approach. You have to, sit and talk with CMOs and CEOs of, Fortune 1000 companies. So we want somebody who can talk the language. So ended up taking that on as a challenge. And I really felt like whatever I did in life, I would be better off if I had a sales experience. I went in a little bit cocky, with all my successes at Sears, and really got humbled really fast. Understood that how difficult sales could be, and how even getting one call was a game changer. Somebody to answer your call, I guess. But again, a great experience. We started from zero salespeople, and then We grew up to about 15 salespeople, and again, gave me a great building block for what was to come in the future.
Manny, why did they tap you to come do sales? I mean, you said yourself you were surprised that you were tapped. You mentioned something about being able to converse, at the executive level. Was that it? What did they see in you that you didn't even necessarily see in yourself?
Yeah, now good question. So I think one was I was just a heavy user of that product at Sears. So they were a vendor of ours, and there were a lot of through the partnership we had with them, there were a lot of back and forth with them where I'd actually tried to improve their products based off of my experience using that product. So I developed a close relationship with them. It was really, a product which was really hard to explain. So they basically used AI to write marketing language for your brand, right? And what would resonate with the customer. So it was a concept which was really difficult to explain in layman's language, right? It was not A plus B, you'll save C, right? It was more that, hey, if you did this, we would run 16 experiments to understand what worked best for your customer, and then what emotions were triggered when what people read some statements and whatnot. So it was a very, I felt like it was much more consultative than any other product where you could just say, hey, this is our product, this is what it does, and go. And then it was also a higher value, higher ticket size item. I remember it was at least between $500,000 to $1 million product, right? So it was a lot of a big ticket size item where the sales cycle were long, and you really had to understand the problems of the customer and then really suggest what part of the product can help them.
And so you go there, you build the sales team up to, I think you said 15 people?
Yeah, no, I was part of the sales team, and we went up from, I was an individual contributor there, but we went up from 0 salespeople to 15 salespeople. And then really felt like I wanted to take the next step of either entrepreneurship or search funds, and really started to look deep into search funds because I knew it had triggered something in me when I was at Kellogg. And as I explored different avenues of search, realized that there weren't an easy path for an immigrant, and I'm still am on an H-1B visa back in the day, and as part of the H-1B visa, you got to have employer-employee relationships, so you could not have your own search fund employ yourself. So there were a lot of challenges like that. So I ended up working with a search fund accelerator called Broadtree Partners, and they were I don't know if they were if they underestimated the risk or they liked me enough or more than other candidates, but they decided to give me a shot in 2018.
Manny, tell us a little bit about what Broadtree Partners looks like. So it's an accelerator. Is it cohort based, or do they just tap individuals and then they work with you as an individual? Give us a picture.
Yeah, so Broadtree Partners, at least back in the day, they were a cohort model. So they hired 4 to 6 people every year from mostly 1 to 5 years out of business school. And they brought all of these searchers or operating partners together, and they helped you train and be better at search. And they helped you with a lot of relationships. They paid you a small salary. They sponsored your visa, and then when it came time, they had LPs who we went back to on a deal by deal basis to go raise money for a deal. So that's how it worked.
And in the economic model is similar to a traditional search fund?
I would say so. It's pretty close to a similar traditional search fund. And we also had small equity in everyone else's, like every other member of the cohort's deal, so that it gave us incentives. Not that we needed that. We already had a great personal relationship, but it gave us that financial incentive to root for the success of our cohort mates as well.
Oh, interesting. So each of you had a little bit of equity in the other's deal.
Yes.
Do you think that you would have done this model if you hadn't had the visa hurdle? Or do you think you would have opted for self-funded, or you never even got that far to consider it because you basically already knew that you were going to need somebody to sponsor your visa?
I think it was the latter. I think it's really hard for me to go back in like put myself in those shoes right now because I know a lot more about search and deals and whatnot. But I would say this: I would prefer the search accelerator model over a traditional model, because for a very few points that you give away, you get a lot more. In the long term. And the way I kind of think about that is really, it's not just about the deal and how much equity you get at start, right? It's about, if you think about Manny as an asset, right? If you wanted to maximize the lifetime value of Manny, the most important thing is finding the deal fast, finding a good deal, being able to run and grow that business, being able to exit from that business, and then the world is your oyster, right? And then you could basically, trajectory wise could be very different if you had a great first deal versus like you end up buying a shitty business or average business, went on for 7-8 years, and then, didn't get a great exit for you or your investors. You kind of, in the same place, in my opinion, right? So I figured that each of those things that I said has a probability, right? And if there's being with an accelerator, increase that probability only fractionally, I would still take that bet, right? Because again, it's all about the lifetime value.
And what do you think the value that was provided was specifically that enabled you to, that was worth the, an extra couple of points, and it sets you up to have, just a much stronger first search experience?
Yeah, there are a few. So one was you just get 5 people you have a different relationship with, right? It's this, and your audience knows this, that search can be a lonely journey, and it has its own ups and downs. Having 5 people go through the same experience exactly at the same start date as you, there's just something magical in that, right? It's almost like you went to the war zone together in the bond. You have, that is really hard to replicate in like a loosely formed friendship, like 2 friends who are doing search, I think. And then you have a relationship with these people for the rest of your life, 5 other CEOs, right? That's a good thing to have as well. Speaking of relationship, right? Like in my case, a lot of, we were raising money deal by deal, right? So I was speaking with a lot of LPs myself, going out pitching with Broadtree, GPs, which helped me form a bond with all these investors. In the future, when I needed more money, I was able to bank on those relationships to go back to them and pitch them because they knew me. The other thing was just like basic, like, I'd never done a deal before for Broadtree, right? So it just gives you the confidence of working with somebody who has done that before, being able like bring you or pull you away from pitfalls, basic structuring things. Like there's a lot of things you can waste a lot of time on that they could help you sway away from. So there's a handful of things like that. And obviously you get a small salary that's at least sustains you. Although I lived in San Francisco, so I would not call that sustaining, but besides the point. And then obviously it's the post-acquisition, support system is already there. You have that relationship with that GP who's going to be on your board. So there's a friend in the board at all times, right? Which there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations that you don't want to have with the board, but there's always that GP. And there's just somebody, interests are aligned for the most part. And you're always, you can always confide in people who you've had this relationship with for the past 2 years. So I figured that was definitely worth the few points, that you would shave. Self-funded or not, I think is a different conversation. And, you need to start with how much money you have in the first place. I did not have a ton. I had student debt back in the day. So that was a little bit, outside of the visa situation. It was a little bit of a hard thing to think about at that point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, a lot of people do choose the traditional search fund route, aside from all these pros and cons that people discuss, simply because they have to, they don't have the money to self-fund their search. So they need the kind of stipend or salary that a traditional search fund provides. And Manny, just curious, so your cohort, your comrades, did they all go on to buy businesses? What did your cohort in the aggregate look like in terms of success?
Yeah, out of the 6 people, 5 of us bought businesses. So it was a good percentage there. The 6th person got really unlucky with one deal, which took a lot of his time. But he like after subsequent to leaving Broadtree, he was able to find his own business as well. So
Huh.
technically, all six of us, got businesses and ran them.
And before we get into a little bit about your search and the business that you did find and acquire, going back to the beginning, you mentioned how ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, back in that business school class in Barcelona, just really resonated with you. I can't remember how you put it, but it was pretty strong. Like it just really lit you up. What can you elaborate on that? We, meaning me and the audience, could probably guess because since we're all similarly drawn to it, but articulate it for us.
Yeah. So I think, so I was always like, I need to do a startup because I love the accountability. I love the independence. I love the impact you could make. But when I was doing that class, what I realized was what I loved about entrepreneurship was really working with people, getting a team, getting them excited about a vision, working with them on a day in and day out basis to work towards that vision, more so than like building a product or, product market fit or raising money. Those were kind of like, for me, it was like, I'd have to do that. I'll do that if I have to do that, but I don't really love doing that, right? And this one basically gave you a jump start, like Search Fund gave you a jump start to really get to that stage directly and then grow on from there on out. So that was like for me, it was like, wait, you don't have to pay any money and you can be a CEO of a business you have ownership with and you can get to lead people and, without that risk of ever needing to start a business or raise money and all that. How's that even possible? So for my mind was like what's the catch, right? And then as you learn more, as I talked to more searchers, I was like, there was no catch except you just have to bust your ass to get through all those stages, which I was totally fine with.
Okay, Manny. So take us to your search and anything you think is relevant to the search piece of your story before you find your street sweeping businesses.
Yeah. So I went in, and I had to kiss a lot of toads to find my princess, if I might say that. So I got like 6 or 7 LOIs through my 2-year period, but every time something happened, right? And I was like, maybe I'm just cursed, and one of these deals where you'd go up, like I went to like 2 deals. I went after KOV legal had started. And just fell apart at the altar. But then, in the hindsight, 2020, and I'm happy those deals failed because I ended up, I think buying a really cool business, which we can get into in a minute. One advice I have always given searchers, which is I also got that advice, but it's really hard to take. And you kind of, most searchers slip on that is once you get a deal, you kind of stop your pipeline, right? You start to like, romanticize the idea of working in that company, being a CEO, all that. And and you kind of also get into the zone of like, hey, I don't want to do other deals because it feels like cheating or, it doesn't feel right to be pitching to somebody else. As you're like talking to this one person, it's kind of like, you kind of correlate that with like almost dating in some ways. Right. But I thought that's a rookie mistake that people make. And, it's about a process. It's about being committed to the process where you are going to be aggressive. You're going to be disciplined. You're going to be, rinse, repeat, until you find a deal, right? So you gotta go at it from that mindset and look at your funnel every day, right? Even though you might have 2 LOIs, you still don't have the most important step, which is to buy that company, close that company. So until you have that, you have to keep the whole funnel kind of going, for lack of a better word. So that's a rookie mistake, and I did it like multiple times because I had multiple LOIs, and I wish I wouldn't have done that. And also like I came from the sales world, so that was shame on me to do that because I understood the process. So that's one advice I would give to searchers. It's really hard, and a lot of people listening to this would be like, yeah, I wouldn't do that when I search, but trust me, if you don't do it, you'd be really compelled to do, like at least think so. But that's one advice I would definitely give new searchers.
So even though you did 6 or 7 LOIs, and once you got under LOI, you weren't great at continuing to fill your pipeline. I'm surprised that you're doing things so sequentially. You're doing so many LOIs, and you still are able to complete your search in less than 2 years, the less than 2 years that Broadtree gives you, because, one deal under LOI can suck up months. So were you toward kind of the end of your 2-year mark when you finally found the street sweeping businesses?
I was. So just to clarify on that, so the first 3 LOIs, I wasted about 2-3 months in each of those, 3-4 months in each of those deals. And then I remember early part of 2020, I had a oh shit moment where I was like, oh shit, all these LOIs have gone away. I have no pipeline, and COVID is kind of coming in. I've been with the company, with Broadtree, for a year and a half. What am I going to do? And then I was just like, I don't care about anything else. I'm just going to make the most of these 6 to 8 months that they have and just go after it like there's no tomorrow, right? And I just, I increased the volume, the number of calls I did. I did like, I remember 5-6 calls every day for the next 4 or 5 months, pushed every deal that I thought had a chance of us closing. And within 3 months, and it was also like, I got lucky, and it was also the COVID time, so people were kind of nervous about what was going to happen. I got 3 LOIs. So in like May or June of like 2020, I had 3 LOIs. And I was just like, with Broadtree, I was like, we got to do QV in all 3, because I'm not leaving here without a deal. And they were like, we can't spend money on 3 QVs. So, it came to that point, and eventually it became really clear the business that I bought would be the most sustainable business through COVID. And I had the biggest interest amongst, the preliminary conversations I had with the investors. So it was easy for me to shed that. But I remember until the close of the deal, I was still pushing for those 2 other deals and my pipeline. And I was able to pass those 2 deals to, other searchers in my cohort, one to another cohort in Broadtree. Those deals didn't close because of a variety of reasons, but I was able to do that, right? So that's the other thing, right? Like, you don't have it until you have it, and you can't be complacent. And there's some luck involved, but there's a lot of process, there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of work, hard work that goes into it, as many people who have gone through the process know.
Well, I guess nothing like panic to make you start really motivated and start working harder, huh? Okay, hitting that. It's going back to sales, it's kind of like you weren't hitting your quota. You see it looming there in front of you, getting ever closer, and then you get scared and you start doing everything you can to hit that quota. So, very cool. Okay, Manny. Well, then, so you've got these 3 businesses under LOI within 2 months or 3 months of COVID hitting. You must be the only person on the planet still trying to close a big deal that soon in the wake of COVID, because there was still so much uncertainty. That probably helped you. Less competition, maybe got a stronger multiple. I don't know. So tell us about the business that you did close on.
Yeah. So I was clear that it was not going to be a normal, quote unquote, normal fundraising deal environment, right? Banks were kind of nervous. This was before I think this was around the time or before, I don't recall 100%, but before the stimulus went in. And people were nervous what the world would look like in a couple months, right? There was panic everywhere.
Right.
So the business that was best suited to kind of withstand all of that was the business that I bought, which was a street sweeping business. So, it was an essential service. The street sweeping is not only required for your city streets to look pretty. They literally have a health benefit. Like if you don't sweep your streets regularly, the stormwater runoffs can go into the drainage and can actually impact the water table. So cities had a responsibility to sweep the streets on a regular basis. In fact, they had to sweep the streets to keep their NPDES permit, which is a permit they need to have to keep the city kind of disease free. It was the money that came for street sweeping also came from special funds within municipalities and cities. So it's like people are like, oh, what if like municipalities, cities start going bankrupt, right? But the money is actually the part of the enterprise fund or a special revenue fund, which is not part of the general fund, wherein they always have money for that, right? It's like part of in many cities, it's part of the the refuse fund, where you pay money for your garbage collection. It's part of that goes into street sweeping. It's almost like a business center for the city and municipality. So they would never run. They would always have the money, and they're mandated by law to spend it on these specific activities.
And every municipality has this. I'm sorry, what was it called? The restricted fund. They all have this. This is a typical structure you see across all municipalities.
Yeah, there's they call it differently, but there are three types of funds, right? There's a general fund, which is they invest in everything they want to invest in, the libraries, the parks, and whatnot. There is an enterprise fund, which is basically almost like a business unit. They make money from the residents on collection of garbage and whatnot. They use that and that money can be only used for street sweeping, garbage, or waste collection, those kinds of efforts. So that's the business, that they always have money for that because they're getting paid for the customers. And if they don't have the money, they'll just raise the rates for that, right? And then there's a special revenue fund wherein they're earmarked for special activities that you can only, it's called a refuse fund. It's like a disposal fund. They call it differently in different cities. You can only use that for certain, if you wanted to build a new library, you could not use those funds, right? For example, right? So that was really good to know. And in fact, we went back and saw that in 2012, City of Stockton went bankrupt, and the City of Stockton was a customer of ours. But the sweeping went on regularly. It didn't miss beat because that was not part of the fund that had gone bankrupt. So it was essential service. It was very from a funding source, it was stable funding source, right? As stable as it gets, in those times. It was recurring revenue because you had these 3, 5, 10-year contracts with cities, and it was literally running trucks on time was the only thing you had to do, right? I could tell you what my revenue was going to be 4 years from today, or let's say 2 years from today, and on a random October like today, because I knew I was charging them exactly the same thing. These were the 3 routes for this city. These were the 2 routes for that city. So there was a lot of things to like in that business. The owners were great, and I had a good relationship with them. The industry in general was very fragmented, right? At least back in the day. Now, not so much, but back in the day, it was, 80% of the industry was probably less than 10 pieces of equipment, and we had 100 trucks, right? So we were one of the larger companies when we bought the company. And I felt like it was kind of like a, as you said earlier, it was kind of like the boring industry where people had not, gone in and done a lot of value add and improvements, tech and whatnot, and which I felt I could go in and do a lot of those things to get meaningful value add pretty quickly. And then acquisition was always on the cards because you're buying contracts really when you're buying companies more than anything else. So that was one of the 2 companies we bought. By the way, we bought 2 companies right out of the gate, both from the same owners. This was the municipality sweeping company, and then there was a construction street sweeping company, which had a little bit different dynamics. It was hourly to general contractors, but mostly to general contractors that build roads and highways. So again, federal funding coming in, and it was regulatorily mandated for you to have a sweeper on site while you did the road construction, because again, they didn't want the runoff to go into the gutter and drainage. So the entire road construction could shut down if you didn't have a sweeper on site, right? So, and then it was a very small share of wallet for the general contractor, right? $200 an hour versus tens of thousands of dollars they're paying for, everything else, their crew and whatnot. They didn't care about, they just wanted good service. They didn't really care about price as much. They were less price conscious, sensitive, because again, they're spending tens of thousands of dollars an hour. So that was also very niche-y, very nice business. Even though they were in the sweeping space, there were some similarities there with the essential nature of the service, but they were different in many regards because that was hourly. Somebody called you a week in advance. You book the trucks. It's almost like a taxi calling service. Whereas municipality sweeping was a lot more like steady Eddie. You had these 5-10 year contracts. Another thing that was might be interesting to your viewers could be this construction sweeping company was a union company. So we had two unions there, both Teamsters and operating engineers.
Manny, let me pause you because I do want to spend a little bit of time on the union, so we'll get there. But let me jump in with some questions. So it's interesting that we hear about this dichotomy between construction revenue versus kind of maintenance revenue. You hear about that in landscaping, among many other industries, or project revenue versus contract recurring revenue. And so interesting that even in street sweeping, that turns out to be a thing. So that all sounds wonderful, like a very appealing business, particularly the business, the municipal side of the business more than the construction, since it's recurring revenue. But let's talk about two of the quote weaknesses, perhaps, to this business. Let's nitpick a little bit. These machines, the street sweepers, I know from our pre-call, cost $500,000, so heavy CapEx, and that. The answer may simply be, well, yeah, you just factor that into the cost structure, and that's that. But answer that for us. But then also customer concentration. So I would imagine that one or two municipalities could represent a size. How many customers did you have is the question, and what was your largest customer as a percentage of revenue? So CapEx and customer concentration, please.
Yeah, the second one I'll tackle first because it's a quick answer. So we did not have customer concentration. In fact, we were the largest player in the municipality player in second largest in California, largest in Northern California. So we had a really high concentration of customers. We had about 45 to 50 customers, and none of the customers were over 10% of our revenue. So there was very less customer concentration, amazing. In fact, which is really good. On the first piece, so amazing. The CapEx piece, I don't want to say I have a bone to pick with people who say, these are the parameters you want to go after when you're doing search. I do want to say that you should look everything with some context. Sure, it's a high CapEx business. Does that mean I automatically reject that, or I dig a little bit deeper? So if you dig a little bit deeper, what you find out is there is what they call a maintenance CapEx. Right, which is like you just need to buy the X number of machines to keep the same number of trucks, right? Which is a maintenance CapEx. So the way I looked at this was not on an EBITDA basis, which was, depreciation is a real expense, right, in these high CapEx business. So what I did was EBITDA minus maintenance CapEx as my free cash flow metric. And it still made sense from a multiple standpoint in terms of what we were paying for that company. That's one. Second one was CapEx is a bad thing, but can also be a friend. The friend part is like not everyone in a really fragmented industry can afford. Back in the day, the trucks were $350,000 could afford those type of trucks. And many cities, because of California being California, mandated use of new equipment. So there were very few people who were able to bid for those municipalities. Hence, you could. There was less like competition because of that those very equipment that you had, right? There was also regulations coming in called CARB, California Air Research Board, where you could not have trucks older than a certain period, which drove away a lot of people who didn't want to invest more in the business, right? So then you're the only. I remember, we were the dominant player in Northern California. Like we always bid for cities, and they were like two or three other competition, like local, regional competition in Northern California. But we were able to use that to our to a quote unquote advantage because not everyone had that. Not just from what I inherited from the business, but also I went in anticipating that CapEx. So I had an equipment line of credit. I was able to explain to the banks what I was looking for in the next 6, 12, 18 months in terms of CapEx investment. Also, it was smart CapEx in that you didn't have to buy the trucks until you won the contract in many ways, right? So you're able to, if you win a contract of $500,000 for 5 years, you can invest in one truck, right? You can take it to the bank. And then the other thing was the CapEx was the truck market was very liquid. It's almost like, if you didn't want the truck, you bought a secondhand truck, let's say, you didn't want the truck, you sold it a week later, you'd probably get the same price. right? So it's not like you're stuck with this. Like, there are different types of CapEx, right? If you buy a CapEx, if you put CapEx in building a manufacturing plant, yeah, you're stuck because you built that manufacturing plant. You can't undo that. But if you bought a truck and you're like, oh shit, I don't have ways to use this truck, you can hypothetically sell that truck the next day. So there's all kinds of so that's why I feel like when people have those guardrails around what they should buy and not buy, they kind of tend to forget. And a lot of times that's why it becomes like an opportunity for you, because people like small private equity funds or, other investors who are just looking at it at a surface level tend to disregard some of those businesses. But sometimes it could be like a diamond in the rough, which is what I found street sweeping CapEx to be in my mind.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, that it probably makes it a less competitive business to acquire, but also a great point that you made that assuming you're not a tiny little guy, you're a business of some size, that CapEx can be a moat or a competitive advantage against your competitors once you're in the business. So very interesting. Okay. So, all right. So here we are, and you're doing all this out of the Bay Area. You're living in the Bay Area at this point?
Yep. I lived in Fremont, and our offices were in Milpitas, Fremont, and Stockton. 3 offices and a couple of satellite yards.
And so you bought 2 businesses from the same owners, and the one business was municipal revenue, the other business was construction. Pick us up from there. Yeah.
So bought that business. Obviously, it was not your typical business that you would expect as you kind of glorify being a CEO like before you start search. Street sweeping is not I didn't board that flight from India thinking one day I'll be a street sweeping company owner or whatnot, or even remotely similar. No. But you find yourself in a blue collared environment, right? Which is very different from what you've done. And, especially in the US, because, I'd only worked at like professional services, big, large companies, business school before that. So I had a very different, exposure to a very different type of, persona or people. And, so I was a little bit nervous going in. But actually, when I went in, I felt like, I had a breath of fresh air for whatever reason. One, I felt like the role that I had, I could sense from day one that I was doing the right thing with my life. And I don't know how else to describe that. 80% of my time was spent on doing things that I loved to do, which was to work with people, get them excited about a vision, work towards analytically solving for issues that people typically don't spend a lot of time on. Those kinds of things. I obviously had a credibility. I had to establish credibility really soon because, again, people like me don't run street sweeping businesses in the Bay Area, especially. So I had to establish that really, really quickly, and I did find that it was hard in the beginning, but I felt like people, gave me space, and then I was able to learn and develop a personal relationship with each of the people that I met. Just by virtue of me being side by side with them in the trenches, I over time, I sensed that I could gain their respect as well. But there was a lot of like lower hanging fruits that I could attack right day one, right? Well, they're not day one, but Manny, quarter one.
Let me stop you. I want to get to the low-hanging fruit, but I have a bunch of questions about this transition period. You said a number of fascinating things there. So a lot of the caution that we hear about in our space is buying a blue-collar business, because first of all, there can be a culture gap like you experienced, where people who buy businesses often come from white collar backgrounds, sometimes very great, some of the world's best business schools. So very highfalutin environments to blue collar environments. So there's a culture gap there. Also, just the nature of the work is something that I hear repeatedly. Like the MBAs underestimate or don't fully understand what it means to parachute into a blue collar business, and what your day-to-day looks like, and how you can get in there on day 1 or day 8 and be like, oh dear, this is actually not for me, and then you're stuck. So I think you just said from day one, you felt like it was just right. So contrast your feeling of rightness to some of the people who will be listening to this and wondering if they should buy a blue collar business, and those who already have and think that they've made a mistake. What's different about Manny's experience and those experiences?
Yeah, part of it is my background also, right? So I grew up in India, and my dad was in the army, so we've kept moving around a lot. So I was like really comfortable with change, and it's like I was pretty flexible with like what I needed to sustain myself, and I was able to quickly make friends because I changed every year, like school every year. So I kind of had a lot of practice around that. But also, like when I was an engineer, I actually worked in India at a power equipment manufacturing company. Where I was on the shop floor of manufacturing, day one, right out of undergrad for a couple years, right? And I didn't know then, but it definitely it set the stage for honing in on my interpersonal skills, right, with people, especially blue collar people. That was also union labor, by the way. And I don't know how to say this, but I'll say it the way it's kind of coming in my head is I just felt like those were real people when you talk to them, and it's, I feel like as MBA folks, you tend to start to get entitled a little bit, oh, I only, doing this much, or my salary should be that much. Just having that real nature, somebody who can, for 80 grand salary, can work their heart out and still want to still love their job and love the company as if it's their own, going above and beyond, not really asking, like having the service attitude of giving versus trying to take, was just a breath of fresh air to me. I just felt like that's, I felt independent. I just felt like this is like the real America. This is the, these are the people that, not saying that anything specifically wrong with what highly motivated, ambitious people think through, but it was just great to just be with like folks who were just like love their job and love coming in every day and saving money for the company. And so I just have had a personal connection with them that that I loved from day one. I also feel like the good thing about, and again, this is a learning for anyone who's hearing this. A lot of times you're focused on EBITDA of the business, right? Hey, $3 million EBITDA, I want to go buy that business. But they're not focused as heavily on the team, right? And what kind of like middle management you have as a team. And this business, and I didn't really appreciate it when I bought the business because, again, I was also looking at EBITDA, but they had general managers, they had supervisors, they had foremen, they had all those middle management layer that didn't make me feel like I needed to like get a hold of everything right at day one. And I had the flexibility or timing to take it at my own pace. That helped me a lot because I knew the business was getting taken care of on a day in, day out basis. I literally just met personally with every employee of the company, from the driver to, general managers, and really was able to strike a personal relationship, at least to some extent, with all of them, which helped me tremendously, as I understood their business, understood their lives, understood what their ambitions are, understood what their incentives could be, understood what their challenges were. All that, upfront time that was spent with them was, I think, well spent and helped me a lot throughout the time we held the business.
And how many people were at the business? How many employees were there?
So across both businesses, there were over 100 people, about 125 people. And again, as I said, there were 2 unions in part of the business, and there was a whole non-union arm as well. So 2 different companies completely separate from each other.
I want to ask 2 more questions on buying a blue collar business. I don't want to beat this to death, but I know people wonder about it. First, being an immigrant yourself, you've already touched on a little bit about how that informed your experience. But I know, because I've gotten emails to this effect, that people who are not from the real America. Maybe they're people of color, maybe they're immigrants, maybe they're sons and daughters of immigrants, wonder if it could be difficult for them to buy a business from maybe a retiring blue collar owner and then to preside over a blue collar business. It's just something that enters their mind naturally. What would you say to them?
I would say there's some truth to that, right? Like it's not, I'm not going to jump to the R word directly, but it's just about exploring commonalities between, whoever you're talking to and being able to establish a relationship, right? You're more likely to establish a relationship with someone who you have some common grounds with, right? More, and especially when it's the question of selling, or selling your company, which is, your proverbial baby, and give it away to somebody who you can trust, with the employees you've, had a relationship for all your life. So there is some of that, but I sense in many, and there were some owners who I could just sense that right away when I was talking to them through my search process. There were other owners who were skeptical as they got into it, in the conversation. But for the most part, I felt like these people were street smart people, right? These people not stupid people. They've built businesses from ground up by hustle, brute force, and they know what to look for in people. They've interviewed people. They've had teams before, right? So these are like intelligent folks, in my opinion. So it didn't take them long to understand that you were also a person, like you were a smart person. You had done your research. You were asking good questions. You were giving them suggestions. Early on in the process, free of cost, as you discussed more about the business. Sometimes you were sending them, like I remember through COVID, I sent them every good legal article that I got to owners of the business in terms of what they should do and what policies they could have. So you're just adding value to what they were doing. You were taking that putting that extra effort to go and see them. A lot of times people are like, okay, I can just call somebody or get on a Zoom call, more so now than then. But I just felt like for both you and them, it's a 1,000 times better to be in front of those people and talking to them one-on-one, both from a standpoint of for you to learn the business and love the business, but also find reasons where you're like, this is not a good fit for me, right? So again, there's a whole balance between, how much time you got to spend, driving out there, flying out there. But I've been a big proponent of doing that, just going out there physically. And that helped me a lot as well. So I think, the short answer to your question is yes, initially it is tough and hard. And, you have an accent and people like, what are you doing? And in the Bay Area, especially, you have people have a very different connotation of what brown people do in the Bay Area. But I think it takes an hour or two of good research, questions and, relationship building that you could do with them. And there's always common grounds with regards to what you want to do in life. A lot of times it might not be about the past, but it could be about the future, what you could do with their company to grow their company, how you can make them more money, right? Through cash at close or old equity or whatnot. So there's always those kinds of discussions that you can have with people, and those things fall away. And to be honest, that was a lot of that I attribute to going to Kellogg, which is the business school I went to, where I was able to practice those skills, right? In the first year, it was pretty hard for me to come in. A lot of times I didn't even understand if people were talking about music, sports, or something else. I literally would be standing in those circles, and I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. Even the topic, I don't understand. And then spending enough time with people, Kellogg as a school forces you to be in teams a lot more. So are just developing those deep relationships, or the skill sets to develop those deep relationships was again, I had the training ground at Kellogg, which was super helpful. And then I think one of the things that a lot of immigrants unfortunately have is inhibitions or lack of confidence, right? I did too, and I still do to some extent, right? But it's about jumping with both feet in, and realizing that what's the worst that can happen. You could look stupid, and a lot of times you do look stupid when you're stammering or you wanted to say something, you can't think of a word because you're still thinking in a different language, and a lot of times I did look stupid, but the frequency of me looking stupid, I think, went down over the years. And that's been super helpful, like, because a lot of times it's easier for immigrants to be like, okay, I'm going to stick with the Indian population, or if I'm Asian, I'm going to stick with the Asian population, right? And it just robs you of the chance to have a global mindset, or have like a learning opportunity, which the biggest, in my opinion, is the biggest thing why you pay $200,000 to go to a business school, is to be able to do that. So I think, I've said a lot of disparate points, but hopefully that, it answers your question. But that was my experience.
Yeah, that was awesome, Manny. Thank you for that. And my last question on the blue collar businesses. One thing I've heard you say now a couple of times is that you really get charged up by motivating a team and getting them signed on to your vision and marching forward to a glorious future. Now, I this is delicate because I'll just say it. I have heard from a number of people who buy blue collar businesses that folks in blue collar businesses don't have the same kind of motivations. They're differently motivated. It's not that they're unmotivated, but they're differently motivated than your average Kellogg grad, who's kind of, frankly, often defined by their personal ambitions. And blue collar people are often just oriented a little bit differently. Not necessarily better or worse, but different. And so they'll get into a blue collar business, this enterprising MBA or somebody coming out of corporate who wants to now own their own business with all these ideas and all these plans and all this energy, and find that it just goes over like a lead balloon to the staff that they've inherited, who doesn't necessarily want a lot of disruption or racing or energy in their existing lives. They just find it kind of disruptive. And they're not similarly motivated because they didn't buy the business. They're still, maybe they get a little raise from you, but it's not like there's some gold at the end of the rainbow for them. So all of that said, how do you respond to all of that? It sounds like you were able to motivate folks in an environment like that. How do you respond to all that?
Yeah, no, I think there's definite truth in that. First of all, when you buy a business, you rarely have a team that you would otherwise have put together yourself if you had started that business. You rarely have that. And I'd be, if that they had that team, they probably wouldn't sell it to you, and they definitely wouldn't sell it to you at a multiple you want to buy the business at in the search fund world, right? So there's those challenges for sure, right? But I think what I've realized over the years of running multiple companies, teams, and whatnot. Two things. One is it's all about the attitude, I think, right? It's less about the potential, it's less about the caliber of that person at day one. It's all about the attitude. And I'll give you an example, like a lot of times we would have some issues street sweeping in a street, and then when you found you could have somebody out there for years and you would have complaints. And then you would send somebody in who's less experienced than that person, and zip, no complaints. It's all about, I figured, at least in that job and many other jobs, it's about how do you even if you're doing an hourly job and supposedly you're doing a street sweeping job, which might not be looked on from the society a certain way, you take pride in your work, right? And those are skill sets, soft skill sets, that I felt like I was always looking out for. Somebody who went above and beyond, right? Somebody who didn't just do like my 9 to 5, get my OT and out, right? So we heavily rewarded people who just like, we got, one example was somebody, had dropped their wallet, and the sweeper had sucked the wallet up and, drove away, and they had called that driver through the city, and the driver went with that resident to the place they dumped the debris and looked for the wallet and found it, right? And that's just like blowed me away.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's just hard to find. And the other thing that I said, two things in the beginning. So The other thing I found was, even though they might not be incentivized by the same thing as you, which could be like, oh, I want to build this empire as a Kellogg grad, or, revenue EBITDA, but they have a lot of, aspirations for, like, let's say, their families, right? Or what their business work life should look like. And, if you put the right people in the right place, you were able to draw out, performance from people who were able to not give their best in their roles they were assigned to. And the third time was like, yeah, of course, there were people who were like, these people, this is destroying my culture, and this is not the right fit, and you gotta move on those people fast, because they do more harm than good in the culture form, and they bring more people down. It's just a dark cloud hanging over. You could sense that. A lot of times that's our first instinct is right. And then you test that, you ask people around, and you know that that's the right thing to do. And you just got to act on that fast. And then you got to look for structural things too, right? And in our case, we looked at people who had two jobs weren't doing as good a job with street sweeping as people who just use this as their sole job. And it's, it's Bay Area, it's expensive. So people sometimes needed two jobs to sustain their families, which was obviously sad to hear, even though we were paying really well. But then what I said was like, let's just reduce the workforce, give people full 8 hours, and give them overtime if need be, instead of hiring that one person for 4 hours, every other day. Right. So then they know that all that money, like, they're getting a good salary from the company, they're getting good OT. They don't have to look outside. They're getting a fixed schedule of work. They know the same day, every day they sweep the same city, that improved their work-life balance or quality of life significantly, because they knew their schedule for the entire year. I could give their schedule today for the entire year, and they just had to do a good job. That was their sole purpose. They had the same truck. Two people didn't use that same truck. They were responsible for that truck. Those kinds of small adjustments that you do on operational front resulted in huge increases in my opinion, the morale and motivation to do well. And and that was the reason why we were able to sustain a 90% plus re-sign or rebid rate. Even sometimes when we were not the lowest bid, we were able to win because of our quality of service. So those were kind of, my disparate thoughts on your question. Hopefully that answers that.
It does. Thank you. Let's now turn to, since we're talking about the people so much, let's turn to the fact that the union, which you've touched on already. So assume a low level of knowledge about unions here, because I have a low level of knowledge about unions. I'm sure a lot of listeners will know more than I. And just kind of tell us what we should know and understand about buying a business that has a big union presence.
Yeah, I mean, unions, and it's a very polarizing topic, right? As I'm sure I think it has its pluses and minuses. It's like anything. If it works well, it works really well. If it doesn't, it can get really ugly, like those kinds of scenarios. In our case, it worked pretty well in that for a lot of our customers who were general contractors, they were all union too. So they had to go out to the market looking for union companies only. So there was already, at least in the construction street sweeping world, right? So there was a lot of competition that went away because they were not union, right? The other thing that was really great was it was level playing field for every competition. All the competition, they were paying exactly a collective bargaining agreement defined union wages. So it was to the penny, you're paying the drivers the same as your competition. So then at that point, it all boiled down to how efficient you were, how tech savvy you were, how customer service oriented you were. And you can win on those things versus like just, hey, I'll just father and a son duo, I'll just pay whatever to myself or my son and then start competing with you. That was not the case, right? You had to be paying the workers the same as the rest of the competition. The other thing was they were pretty well compensated, right? So sometimes drivers would make like, $70, $80 an hour, right? which was a good compensation. Couple drivers made like 80, 100 grand as well in driving trucks, which is good money. So there was less retention issues. So everyone wanted that job that paid you so well, right? So we didn't have like that much churn in our labor, which saved on like various hassles of training people and less liability, more dependability, more customer service orientation. So that was again a win for me, because that's a huge problem in the blue collar world, is to attract the right kind of talent, right? The downsides are obviously like kind of obvious. It's pretty expensive to run the business. There's all these fringe benefits that you gotta spend on, which is makes your labor costs high. If you don't have a good relationship with the unions, that can get pretty ugly. I heard horror stories. We thankfully had good relationship with the union. We did everything by the book. Made sure that the unions got their check on time. We had a good relationship with the union rep. If we had some personal issues, we were able to collaboratively solve for those. And to be honest, we were small. Like, we were part of the two unions, which are massive unions. So we were like small. We were not the Tesla plant in Fremont that they were trying to unionize and fight for. We were like 40, 50 drivers. That was in the grander scheme of things. As long as we kept our head down and did the right thing, we were kind of left alone, so to say. Mm-hmm. So I think for us, it was a net positive. And that's why I think the owners in the previous owners had actually created this union company to go after that market. And I think it was I would say, though, from about selling point, when you sell your business, like when you buy the business, there's a lot more questions from the union than a regular company. So it does become a little bit harder to convince a buyer to buy a company which is union. So there's some downside to that, because there's a lot of like pension liability. How are the unions doing? Can you withdraw away from withdrawal liability? There's all kinds of liabilities that unions come with. But it's all about communication. If you explain it properly, and if you've been on the right side of the books, you can do it.
A recent guest, James Bloom, mechanical HVAC, worked with his local union here in the DC area or Baltimore area, and it was great for his business, and he had a great relationship with the union. And one of the benefits, he said, was that it was a great source of labor. So in a world where hiring plumbers is really difficult, he could, more or less pick up the phone and be kind of have a great plumber recommended to him and come work for him, thanks to his union contacts. Did that play the same way for you?
Yeah, it did. I mean, it kind of boils down to, if you're getting paid significantly more than the non-union shop somewhere else, you attract more people and you attract better people, right? So it's just I think it's a function of that. Having somebody like an infrastructure of the union that has a scalable way to bring those pool of labor in and then send it to you, that is obviously a benefit. But in our case, we had very little churn, because I think we were just good with our employees, and the retention was high. So we had very little churn. So we didn't have that problem too much. And every time we did, we always were able to find somebody on our own accord without even going to the union. So yes, but we didn't have that issue, or we didn't have that, even that positive impact directly from the unions. We just had it because we were paying a lot more.
Okay, good distinction. Manny, we're bumping up on time, but we still got a few topics to hit here. So let's keep going and go quickly. We talked about long-term contracts, that you could see into your revenue years ahead. So you could tell me what your revenue will be in June 2025, sort of thing, 2026. From our pre-call, you did also acknowledge, though, that one of the bad things about recurring contracts in an inflationary environment is that now what you're getting paid every month is anchored to what you agreed to when things were a lot cheaper, and now prices are going up on you, and you have to do what? How do you manage in an inflationary environment? How do you manage these long-term contracts?
Yeah, first you panic and you have a oh shit moment, and you start looking at your P&L and your fuel's got, fuel is almost double of what you paid. Fuel was a big chunk of our expenses, and parts were 150% more. Trucks were harder to get by. Labor wanted more, otherwise they were moving away from California. And this is like the peak of if it's been talking about inflation, the period of like 2021, 22 is probably the worst time to have a fixed price contract with the municipalities. So we had that moment, and we were just like, oh, what do we do? On the union side, it was good because we were able to raise prices every year, right? So it didn't matter, or I guess it mattered less on the union sides, which is good because that was half our business. So half of our business didn't get impacted too much. On the municipality side, we were like, oh shit, like what do we do? And I was like, we should just go back to the municipalities and see if they would do an ad hoc amendment, because guess what? They lived in the same world as we did. And they also had employees. They were facing the same issues like we did. And when I went in, I thought between the 50 contracts, let's say if I went to 50 of them, I would get like 5 people or 10 people to give me something. I was actually surprised. We were able to get like an increase, some sort of increase, out of turn increase from like 25, 30 contracts out of the 50, which was, one, we were diligent about it. We went to the list. We wrote a big letter about what's going on, gave them like actual price specs of different parts in 2020, 2022, or 2021. And then fuel prices, everyone knew about the fuel prices. It was like $6.50 a gallon from like a year before it was $3 a gallon. Most municipalities, because they looked at us as partners. Again, they didn't have a street sweeping. They were outsourced street sweeping service, right? So they didn't have a street sweeper. So if we went out of business, then they would be stranded too, and they would have to like magically get a $400,000 street sweeper and then train somebody and a mechanic to work the streets. And street sweeping is one of those things which is nobody notices until everyone notices, right? So you get calls to the mayor, calls to the council. There's all kinds of like political, like city, county relationships that get entangled in the street sweeping world if it's not happening well. So so we banked on that a little bit, and it took a lot of like going to the cities, explaining to them, pitching to them, and for the most part, they were like appreciative of the things we were going through, and we were not asking for the world. We were not, trying to take advantage of the situation. We just wanted to get back to our quote unquote normal margin dollars that we were making, and showing them that Excel calculation, being transparent, being upfront with them helped. And we were able to keep, by and large, there was a dip in margin, but then we were able to get back to our usual margin within like 6 months or so. So that was, but it's just one of those things which is like, you wouldn't know until you try. And, you would miss, what was that Michael Jordan saying? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And that was my philosophy kind of going in, and it worked out.
In so doing, you uncovered another kind of strength of your business, which, yes, you realized going into street sweeping that it was a quote essential service, but like I think you uncovered just how essential it was, or just how badly your customers want to see you survive and prosper. Reminds me of my interview with Caroline Chapdelaine, very different business, manufacturing a widget for in the defense industry. But this was a very strategic, important widget, and her customers were desperate for that widget to keep coming off the production line. And so if her business hit hard times, it was almost like her customers were going to help her survive. So if you can perceive that when you're evaluating businesses, that you are just like that, your customers are desperate for you to continue to survive. That's just a mark of real strategic value in the business. So, Manny, now we've kind of gotten into the weeds of the business. You as operator, let's step back out now to you as deal guy. you looked at the landscape of street sweeping across the country, saw a very fragmented industry, which we all know what that means, what the opportunity there is. But you also saw that there was starting to be some PE activity, as I recall, and take it from there.
I would start with walking you through another oh shit moment. So we bought this business in October of 2020, and we had modeled this business called Sweeping Corporation of America out on the East Coast that had done a mini roll up. And my goal, if you went back to my sim, I had 2 pages of why one day Sweeping Corporation of America would acquire us when they start looking out on the West Coast. And until then, I would be ever so efficient and pick up a bunch of companies and then put a pretty bow on them and give it to them at a pretty significant value appreciation. So that was the whole strategy, right? It's what's the Mike Tyson saying is like everyone has a plan until you get hit or punched in the face. That's what kind of happened with me. So we bought the business in October 2020. Warburg Pincus, the small, dingy $90 billion private equity fund, bought SCA in December. So 2 months after we bought our business. And then in January, or like early part of the year, I don't recall the exact month, but they announced buying our biggest competitor in California. So they we were suddenly in 3 months, we were competing with a Warburg Pincus-backed national company. And then I also had that oh shit moment then. They came to us to sell our business also, and we could have sold at that point also pretty early in the process. But I felt like we had a lot of strengths that was hard, not from a financial scale perspective, but we had such high concentration of business in Northern California. It was hard even for a bigger competitor to come in and break that, right? Because one, you have contracts, so you have contracts. Second is it's such high concentration that the efficiency you derive from one truck was much higher than any competition would. So there were some inherent reasons why I felt like we could compete with them. So we went on the offensive and actually opened up an office in their area, but they were big in SoCal. So we opened up an office in SoCal. We actually won a few contracts from them. And, I presume not their favorite discussion. I wasn't a favorite person in the board meetings or, in their leadership meetings during those days. And then they wanted to buy a business in NorCal to start competing with us. But we were able to convince that company to sell to us. And this was another, big player in Sacramento. So we were going head to head, and then we were able to convince them to come with us. So then we further strengthened our Northern California presence. We literally have the 3 largest companies in Northern California, and it would take them 10 years to, organically etch away at that business without spending a ton of money, right? So we bought that business, and that's when I got a call, from Warburg Pincus, and then we kind of discussed something, and then they kept coming back with a better price, and it just came to a point where I went back to the board. I was like, look, this is literally a 90%, or close to 90% of what our upside case in 5 years was. And we were year 1 into the business, right? Year 1, wow, 13 months into the business. So I was like, we can be stubborn and keep competing with them. I think, we'll survive. But I think just mathematically speaking, I did the whole math. It'd be better to sell this company at this crazy multiple because no one else would give you that multiple, and then give that money back to investors. And you would be better off as an investor to put it in S&P 500 and still make the same money, versus us holding for 5 years. So it was, we sat at that board meeting, and even though it was never my plan to sell these businesses so fast, we sold that business, in February of 2022 to Warburg Pincus's backed SCA, Sweeping Corporation of America.
So that's an 18-month run, or actually less.
16 months.
It's October 2020.
16 months.
Yeah, 16 months.
Yeah.
16 months. And just to recap, you acquired 2 businesses at once, but from the same owners. So 2 different businesses, but kind of a single business, really, sort of. And then you bought another large player in Sacramento during this arms race with the Warburg Pincus acquired business. And so then you have three businesses, and then they came to you and made an offer, and you negotiated back and forth, got that offer up, and sold. Amazing. And just one detail. So did I hear you correctly, Manny, that they had come to you earlier? They'd come to you earlier, interested in buying you when they bought one of your competitors, and you didn't want to sell then? So because you would have been what, 7 months in the business at that point?
Well, actually 4 months into the business, yeah.
4 months.
And and it was we were going to pay short-term gain taxes. So I was like, you should at least run the business for a year. But more importantly, I just felt like we were, that like we had it in us to compete with them at least for the short term. And there were some things we were doing, outside of the inorganic play, right? We were bidding at a lot of stuff outside of geography. We were talking to a couple of competitors. We didn't talk about much today, but we brought on a lot of tech to the company, which was improving our margins significantly. We bought a fleet management system. We bought an AR collect software where AR went from like 3-4 million to like 1 million. So there was a lot of value being added like pretty early on in the process. I was like, I owe it to the company, to myself, to like see some of these initiatives through, which is going to greatly improve the value. If nothing, it's going to, like, even if I stick on for a year, it's going to greatly improve the value of the business because margins would be much better, and we'd be much more kind of integratable for this company that would one day buy us. I knew. So I figured that was not the right time to sell. Plus, like, I thought they were like not giving us the value that we could have gotten, which ended up being the right thing because of our dominant space in Northern California.
Some of these improvements to the business that you make, these are the low-hanging fruit that you had started to talk about a little while ago. Okay.
Yep.
And quickly, because we got to watch the clock here, Manny, just run through 3 or 4 of those again. So we got tech involved, right? So we got like fleet management software, wherein you put this fleet management software.
This widget in every truck, so you would know at all times where all these trucks are. So give you an example, some old lady, obviously, there were a lot of old ladies calling municipalities saying that the street sweeper never showed up on time or didn't show up at all, or was going at really fast pace. Or earlier, they used to just call us and say, hey, you got to go back because you didn't sweep. And we were like, no, the driver promises that he went there. What are you talking about? And then they would be like, you said, I said kind of conversation. Then we had a GPS. So then they would be like, oh, the driver didn't show up. You just send them a screenshot of the GPS. Oh, a driver was in your yard at 10:48 a.m. He was driving at 5 miles an hour. And you could literally track whether his brooms were running or not, whether the water was going or not. You just then send them that snapshot, and the municipality or city would send that snapshot over to the customer, right? So it eliminated a lot of customer service issues. Second thing we were not doing well was maintenance. Like, we were doing maintenance more ad hoc, which was, they were not preventive maintenance schedules. They were just, hey, if something broke, we would do it. So what we use the software for was creating that preventive maintenance schedule, wherein I think over the course of 6 months or so, we just did oil change checks at like certain number of miles. We changed, we just had a whole schedule on that software, which would ping the driver and the mechanic that you got to do this at certain period of time versus in their head or writing it on a piece of paper or someplace. Customer service improved because we had you could just have them sign on a digital paper on like, hey, this truck was here from this time to this time on the construction sweeping side. Billing issues reduced because everything was digital, right? And this truck went from this place, this hour to this hour. Payroll improved because you could tell how much, how many hours a driver spent at a certain site. So there was a lot of improvements like that on the fleet management software side. We got what I said, a software called AR Collect, where they would automatically ping customers to pay invoices. And construction industry is notorious for paying late. So you would just set those automatic reminders going, and then we'd start collecting a lot fast. And then suddenly our working capital, which was huge, went down significantly. Another thing we did was we changed our CapEx strategy. So owners being owners who were worried more about how much cash goes in their pocket, they would look at running the trucks longer and just duct taping the trucks and making sure it ran as long as possible. We changed that to we would buy newer trucks faster and just get rid of the older trucks. So what ended up happening was the maintenance and parts expense would go down, right? But yet the depreciation, when you bought the trucks, your depreciation would go up. But if whoever bought your company were looking at an EBITDA basis, which a lot of buyers were still doing, your EBITDA would be much higher because maintenance and parts expense have gone down. Depreciation has gone up, but that's an add back, right? So EBITDA would go up, right? And then not to say the quality of, like, the driver would love that because he didn't have to like call the mechanic every time his truck broke down. The customer would love it because, you're just sweeping, you're doing a good job, better job at sweeping. So that piece also changed the morale of the mechanics and whatnot. And so that also changed. That was a big change in how we approached business, was like we'd find spending more money because it was better in the long term. And we had the equipment line of credit and all that kind of squared away at the beginning. So that helped out. That helped out a lot. We did a lot of leadership changes, thinking of what I need right now, what I need in the future, who's the right fit for what person. We kind of alluded to some of that early on in our discussion. Spent a lot of time with my team. Opened up an office in SoCal, which was a big competition that the owners always stayed away from because it was a CNG. In SoCal, you used a CNG truck versus a diesel truck, and they were not like really comfortable with that. They're more expensive, but we felt like, that wasn't a big differentiation and we had to be in SoCal. Did that. Obviously acquired a big business. That helped a lot. So those were some of the things that we did. Obviously didn't have a lot of time to do those things in the 16 months or so that we had the business for, but I thought they were packed with stuff that we just kept doing every day, every week, every month. It felt like I was running the business for 5 years.
And Manny, so circling back to the PE acquisition, so ultimately you kind of called your shot in the slide or two in your deck saying this is who's going to acquire us, and ultimately it was them who. Now that business had been purchased in the intervening year by another larger giant private equity fund, but still it was the same business that you thought would acquired you.
Yeah. I would have hoped they would have given me at least a couple years to buy more businesses in California, but you can't always pick your battles. And, I'm still thankful for what we got. But yeah, I knew they were going to come because that West was the only place they could go to because they were doing all kinds of activity on the East Coast.
And I didn't ask you at the outset, Manny, for any of the deal terms. I know you can't say a lot, but maybe can you give a picture of some kind of high level picture of what your initial acquisition was for and then what your exit was for?
So I have to be vague because of confidentiality reasons. We bought the business at sub 5 times EBITDA, and I think we got if you looked at it from an IRR perspective, in 16 months, we were like top 5 percentile of all search funds from an IRR perspective, partly because it was less time, but partly because it was good result. And then I would say top 80, 70% in like MOIC ratio in terms of like search funds, as far as like search funds are concerned. So it was a pretty good outcome. I don't know if I can say more.
I had characterized it as life-changing for you. Is that accurate?
Yes. In many ways, right? Not just financially, but I felt like it does give you a lot more. One, it happened so quickly. So, I still feel like, even though I have all this gray hair, I still feel young to do what something else with the money I have and with the learnings I've had, the connections I have and the background I have. But obviously, life-changing in so many different ways. Yeah.
And now boarding the plane to America and not envisioning that you get into the street sweeping business, obviously, younger Manny would be happy with this outcome.
I think so. But although younger Manny was pretty ambitious, so I don't know. But yeah, no. But no, I think he would be.
Great. Okay, Manny, I want to leave just the last couple of minutes because you've subsequent to your sale and getting out of the street sweeping business, you have acquired another business and you're doing something of a roll up. So give us just a couple minutes on that. Don't have time for a story, and maybe we'll have you back on to hear it in fuller detail in the months ahead. But just tell people what you're working on now.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to our discussion on what you should look beyond the metrics of like what's a good search fund acquisition, and I've continued to believe that. So I ended up buying a platform business, which inherently is not the favorite industry for the search fund world. So we bought a business in the solar industry. So it's part of my private equity that we created called Mars Equity Partners. And within that, I've created a holding company called Mars Energy, wherein we are doing a roll-up of renewable companies in the space. Renewable companies in primarily starting with solar. We bought this company called New Gen Energy, and that's a company that does end-to-end solar services for the agricultural community. So what's happening in the California market? Electricity prices have gone up significantly due to droughts. Farmers need more and more, bigger and bigger pumps, so need more electricity. And solar has gotten cheaper and cheaper especially with the whole Inflation Reduction Act. So suddenly solar has become really, really attractive. It was always attractive, but it's become like, I feel the next 10 years is going to be even more lucrative in solar than it has been in the last 10 years. So bought that first company, and that's gone great. And got a great team. I'm not the CEO of that business. I'm the executive chairman. So I spend all of my time with that business, 80-90% of my time with that business. I'm working more on the business versus in the business. We have a great CEO. We ended up having our first add-on acquisition also, a few weeks ago, in the solar space in California. They've also mandated every new construction, so residential or commercial, needs to have solar going forward. So we bought a company that does serve that community, the general contractor for new construction community. And then we have another LOI that we hope to, knock on wood, close in the next month or so. And then we have a lot of conversations going. So the goal is to be mostly in the commercial space. That's the goal. And serve the 50 kilowatt to 20 megawatt market. And hopefully one day be the largest small commercial player in the country.
And the reason that this doesn't check the boxes for a traditional search acquisition target is because it's high kind of project construction revenue, and because solar is maybe not considered growthy enough, or what? Even though it sounds like it is.
No, solar is definitely considered growth. So, and that's why I feel like you got to look at it with all like different parameters. So it has high growth. That's not a problem. It's high regulatory risk, right? It's stroke of the pen risk, right? What if subsidies go down, right, significantly, and the project nature of this business? Even though my entire strategy is to convert some of this project-based nature into recurring revenue, and we can talk more about that in the next podcast if you invite me again. But the goal is to convert this project-based nature revenue into recurring revenue. Through various means by owning these plants versus selling these plants. And we can talk more about that also. That's why people don't want to buy that business. And it takes some effort to convert the revenue quality of that business, but I'm willing to make that effort because I feel like that's easier to do than to wait 3 years to find the next street sweeping business and then only grow by acquisitions. Whereas this company is growing at 40-50% CAGR organically, let alone adding acquisitions. Right. So,
wow. And Manny, would you characterize what you're doing here? Your role is as independent sponsor, or are you kind of a searcher again, or you just don't really fit any of the buckets? You've just got this kind of plan and you've raised money and you're going out and you're doing it.
Yeah. So when I started to think about what I wanted to do after sweeping, I knew I didn't want to be a pure play investor. So it was something, either the operator role again or somewhere in between. I feel like I'm somewhere in between an operator, like a CEO, and an investor. So if I wanted to put it in a box, I'd call this a holding company in the solar space right now. So where we're growing both organically and inorganically in the solar space, and this holding company would, buy multiple companies in different states and yet have certain things in common, like almost like a blueprint or a playbook in common. Whereas all the other things could be, brand could be different, all those things could be like employees, leadership could be different, but the blueprint remains the same. And that's what I'd call that, for lack of a better word. And, I'll leave you with one last line on this is I realized that the biggest value add that I had at sweeping was when I was working more on the business versus in the business, right? Not to say in the business, not looking at operations, not to add value, but the biggest value add was making those strategic moves. And after the deal got done, I thought about that hard, and I felt like I just had to maximize the number of times that I would do those, I'm able to do those strategic moves, and minimize the time where I'm spending time on like stuff that's not going to add a ton of value to the overall organization. And the way I figured I would be able to do that would be be as an executive chairman role, which is what I am these companies. So I spend all my time with the company. I'm in all the leadership meetings every week, but I'm not at this ground level, blocking and tackling because we have an amazing CEO. But I am talking to other companies we want to buy. I'm talking to a vendor in Vietnam to get the panels cheaper. I'm talking to all the key hires we are having, just interviewing them. And I'm talking about the tech solution that can change the whole landscape of solar, in my opinion. So I'm having those conversations, and and I feel like if I spend enough time doing that, and somebody is able to take care of the business, which the CEO does, I think a growth could be much faster. So that's kind of, again, broad strokes to your question.
Well, the way I find myself reacting to that is that it echoes a model that I'm hearing more and more, just because I'm asking about it more, where so not at necessarily the level you're playing at now, but even first time searchers buy a business and immediately put in an operator, and of course that is often, people are often dissuaded from doing that because you need to understand the business, because don't think that a small business is passive, and all of these quite valid reasons, but the model isn't put in an operator and don't think about the business anymore, and it's just going to mail you checks. The idea is put in an operator, so, as you put it, so the blocking and tackling on a day-to-day basis is handled, and you can go immediately be working on the business side in the business and working in partnership with your operator, with your CEO, your president, your general manager. First of all, it probably prevents you from doing the work you're maybe not that good at, with the operations of street sweeping business, or not as good as somebody from the industry is. And it frees you to immediately just always be thinking strategically. And that all sure sounds fun, just buying a business and moving the chess pieces around. I don't know how realistic it is, but there are more and more stories that I hear on this very podcast from my guests of that model seeming to work. And here you are doing something like it. Again, you probably got a little bit more money to play with than a lot of the folks listening, but still, it's worth noting.
I would say, so yes, but I would say that with one caveat. A lot of people, when they're doing that, they're buying different businesses in different industries, which is very difficult. I feel like you need to be really deep into a business to be making right choices or decisions, right? So I have immersed myself into solar, right? So I don't need to go to the CEO to ask him whether this is a good business fit for us or not. At least I'm at that level. I'm asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And I've been to this, I've went on ride-alongs with solar installation teams. So I'm deep into that one domain, right? So it's easier for me to play that role, strategic role, versus hey, I'm running an e-commerce business on the side. I'm running a logistics business on this side. I'm trying to make these strategic moves, but strategy doesn't work unless you have the business or an understanding of the of the day-to-day. You need that understanding to be making efficient strategy moves. Otherwise, you'll make a lot more mistakes. So I feel like that's a huge difference in what I'm seeing, where people are like, oh, I bought this other business and I'm just got a CEO in there. And I'm like, well, you better find out, hopefully you found an amazing person, CEO, who can keep doing what you want him to do or her to do and mailing you the check. But oftentimes I agree is not the case because there's just so many things that can go wrong with the business, especially at the size we play at.
Manny, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the case study. So going back to your street sweeping success, there Northwestern or Kellogg did a whole case study around your story there. So that will be linked in the notes. It's a great read for not only the drama, but also for if you're hungry for even more of a deep dive into the street sweeping industry. Manny, if people want to get in touch with you, how do you prefer they do that?
LinkedIn is probably the best to reach out, but also, my website, Mars Equity Partners. You can get a hold of me from there on out. But also, my email is not hard to find. I'm pretty sure I'm usually in a lot of these conferences, search fund conferences. I look forward to interacting with as many people as I can. I got a lot of help when I was coming up, and I want to give back some of that to folks who are coming up, and selfishly get a chance to be connected to ambitious, motivated, highly talented people who I would love to have a relationship for the rest of my life, and also get opportunities to invest alongside, which I'm also doing on the side on search. Those would be the best way to reach me, and always looking for like a really good conversation and meeting talented folks.
Great. Well, I think the audience here meet the smart, ambitious, interesting characteristics that you're looking for. So, audience, take Manny up on his invitation to connect. Manny, thanks so much for sharing your story. What a fun and interesting story. And let's connect again about how your solar adventures are going, and maybe get you back in the seat here next year.
Thank you so much, Will. This was a blast. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.